Okay, so this is the plan. So we decided, everyone, all of us, democratically, like by me saying and everyone not disagreeing, that we're going to do a very basic series. So everyone is like sort of up to on some basic things. And it's going to be basically based on a book instead of based on concept, which is never basic, or they are, but not in the way that people understand. So what I want to do is that Rama wrote this book. He wrote this great book called Mishnah Torah, which is supposed to be everything a Yid needs to know and do, or maybe not only a Yid. And he wrote the first book of it, which is more specifically what you need to know, as opposed to what you need to do and other things like that. And what we're going to do is talk about that book. I'm not going to teach the book because it will take a long time. Maybe so we can be able to get into it. We're going to discuss the basic aims and structure of the book. And since it's divided into 5 parts, which you could see in this one very nicely, we're going to have another 5 classes to talk about the aims and structures of each of those 5 parts, called halachot, which is the Rambam's version for like a masechta. That's all. So today is the number 1 or number 0, which is the general one, and then I think there are like 5 weeks until Pesach, where we can go through all of those, and we'll try to get something.
Are we doing Pesach Shia before?
Maybe yes, maybe not. Who knows? We have to do Purim one also, but usually it's just an excuse for like not learning anything and saying like, yeah, but that's a good plan, and hopefully other people will also be able to follow, and instead of getting all confused about what humanity is and who knows. Okay, so that's my plan. So the story is like this. So we have this book called Mishnah Torah, which is like the second Torah, or it doesn't really mean the second. It means the Mishnah Milashan Shinun, like Mishnah, like something that you could say, repeat, Chazer until you know it, something like that. He explains it himself, but he doesn't actually give the explanation of the name, and it's like preface. Okay, and Mishnah Torah is what Rambam says. Since there's something called Torah, this is a little meta, and it's a little hard to talk about about a book about the book too many times. He does give a preface. Does have a preface where he tries to give his definition of his aims and his structure. So he's very logical in that way. Before he writes his book, he has this whole part of why and what and how and all the. Yeah, you need to sit somewhere else, or the other solution is to put the camera behind you and zoom in. But anyways, okay, and he does do the little bit of that. But the basic, and we didn't really ever get into this, but there was a series of classes trying to read the Akdama and working on it.
We did that,
a little bit, yeah, not enough. But the basic upshot of that is that there's a Torah, we got it from Moshe Rabbeinu. There's parts of it that are written down in the Chumash, called Torah Shebeksav. Other parts not written down, but Moshe learned in 40 days, and the whole story. And that's called Torah Shebal Peh. Now, each of these things are actually, the first one is written down, so you just have to read it. Not really going to help you much. Or maybe it is. It's not clear really what the point of the written down part is. But anyway, it's for the Rambam. Different people have different versions. But what are you going to do with it exactly? Maybe it's just like Akdama to understand the Mishnah when the Mishnah quotes it. I don't know. But mostly for a living as a Jew, which means doing all the things that it says, this is basically the Torah, what's called Torah, Tareg Mitzvahs, is Torah Shebal Peh, and that itself has a whole bunch of parts. There's the most important part, which the Rambam cares about, is the law. He conceptualizes it as law, as something close to law, meaning these 613 things, 248 of them to do, 365 of them to not do. It's called negative laws, or mitzvahs lo yisaseh. And there's the basic structure of what is each law, what do you have to do, what kind of thing is it to do, and what not to do, and the basic, not the details, but basic details of them. And that's what he considers Torah Shebal Peh. And then there's what he considers later Torah Shebal Peh, in other words, Torah Shebal Peh, which developed after Moshe, which is what if there's a new case, if it says don't make fires on Shabbos, what if I have a car, different new questions, which have happened since the day the Torah was given, and that's like the secondary Torah Sheba'al Peh. And then the tertiary Torah Sheba'al Peh, which is different, we'll call them takanot v'minhagim, or different rules that were not at all given by God, but were created by the Chachamim in each generation, like to make takanas or to make minhagim, things like that. But anyways, yeah, and all of this sort of boils down to saying in the Talmud Bavli, and he's going to do a summary of it. And since the Talmud Bavli is written in a dialectical way, and the Rebbe doesn't like dialectics, he thinks that it might be a way to get to the truth. Dialectics, okay, what he called dialectics, not what Plato, right? It's Aristotle's dialectics, not Plato's dialectics, but whatever. And anyways, he doesn't like that because he sees it as just like it's a good way to fight and win arguments, but it's not a good way to like know the mitzvahs. Like if you learn a lot of Gemara, you learn how to win all of the arguments, but you still don't know how to make a sukkah from the whole Masechta Sukkah. That's the Rambam's basic problem that he has with Gemara. And already the Rif had this problem, so he like took out all the halacha parts of the Gemara and so on. But the Rambam says, I'm going to solve this problem, and also it's very hard, it's written in Aramaic, and it's messy and it's complicated. It's not rationally organized, or at least not in the way the Rambam wants it to be organized. Right? We went through all these things. So therefore he's going to write a book that's going to be the whole Torah, organized very rationally, extremely rationally. Basically, it's going to tell you everything you need to know. You don't need to know anything else. That's going to be the Torah, okay? And he divides it into 14 books, which is what people call his book Yad HaChazaka, for Yad meaning 14. He didn't give that name, but someone else thought of that remes. And anyways, he divided it into 14 books. Nobody knows where he got the number 14. I had a whole drusha about this once. But anyways, for some reason he likes dividing things into 14. And these are 14 categories, right?
He does it in other places also?
Yeah, there's at least 3 different unrelated things that he divides into 14, or maybe 4. Not related. So yeah, he seems to like that number. Like he would say 10 or 7. The Rambam likes 14. It's twice 7, so anyway.
Final week.
Yeah. Like you should be able to learn it in 2 weeks, 1 a day. I don't think. Anyways, he seems to like the number 14, and he divides the Torah into like 14, like right. And this is like this is basically Aristotle's way of understanding things, right? Categorizing them and subcategorizing them. That's why we have a book that Aristotle wrote called The Categories, which is about categories. Doesn't really mean that in his language, but it doesn't matter. The point is that's what he does. It's called genus and species, right? So everything is like what gets a species, like what kind of something it is, and then what kind of that it is, right? So that's called a genus, right? And so then we can have thousands of levels of that, but always the easiest way to start with is like have the klal, the most general level, and then we can divide it. So in that sense, he has the Torah, which is like okay, the most general, but then his most general classification is 14, and those 14 get further subdivided into each one has halachos. In other words, like the Mishnah has 6 basic ones, and there's Masechtas in each Seder. The Rambam has 14, so it's in some way more detailed than the Mishnah, because like basic categories are more than the Mishnah's basic categories. And then he ends up with, I forgot how many Masechtas, also more than the Mishnah. I don't remember the exact number right now. Like halachot, ilchis Shabbos, ilchis, it turns out to be a lot more than the Mishnah. I don't remember the number of the Rambams. And each one that's chapters and so on. Okay, so that's the basic story, right? Now, something very important that he did, which you have to understand in the context of this structure, is that he thought, well, I could say it in 2 ways now. So one is more basic and more deeper than the other. Number one, he did something unlike everyone before him. In other words, there were people before him that did things close to this, right? The Rif already did like this likut of all the halachic passages of the Gemara. Turns out to be only like a third of the size, because he cuts out all the things that are the Havamin or the Machlokes and things like that. But still doesn't do one thing. And other people, besides for the Rif, like there were Gaonim that literally did, the Rif is still on the order of the Gemara. There were other people like Rav Shmuel Bar Chafni, which is cited often as an influence on the Rambam. Others that like wrote monographs, like Hilchis Gittin. Like we have like all the laws of get, not on the Seder of Zechtes Gittin at all, just like in a logical structure, like what is the get, what is the 3 things that are needed, and so on. Now, one thing that none of these people did, not in the way the Rambam did, is to include what is called Sefer Hamada, right? Things to be believed or to be known, or correct opinions. We'll have to get into the detail at some point. We don't know about that. But anyways, he include what we call in Yana Emunah, Yana from Das, in the Tareg Mitzvahs, in his basic book of the laws of what the Torah will be. This is something that nobody before him did. Of course, Rav Sadego and wrote Maimonides for this, but he didn't think of writing it like into his book of laws, which he did write some versions of. but he never, I don't know, maybe he has a Sefer mitzvahs, so they will have to check if there's like some mitzvahs of Hamada, but there might be, but definitely when he doesn't like give it a place as part of the law that the Rambam does. Famously, the mitzvah of the actual mitzvah, the Rambam said that believing in God is the first mitzvah, and nobody before him thought this way for various reasons. That's just one example of this, but it's a more broad thing, okay? And the Rambam explicitly talks about this. The Rambam, and I give you the paper, he explicitly talks about this, how he did, unlike all the other people before him, both made a book of laws and included the correct thoughts that you should have in the book of laws. Okay, that's the first step. It's not. It's in that sheet. It's source number. I have it here. Where did I put it? Source number 4. It says Dalet, and it says somewhere. Oh, I forgot. I had emphasis over here. It says somewhere here. It says Kasha nechlas l'zeh. You look in the third paragraph of that as Dalet. It says like this. It says. The first two just says that this is his Rambam justifying himself and doing a defense of his certain things that he wrote that people were upset about. But in order to do that, he goes through like his whole project and he says, "Look, I not here to become the great Rambam. I'm just here to help Yidden because I saw that people have a very hard time finding out what the mitzvahs are from the Talmud, so he made things easier. This is the Rambam being like a nice, that he wrote the Rambam only because he was a nice guy. They wanted life to be easier for us. So I was like, you're struggling so much with the Gemara, let me make it easier for you." And that's what he says. And he says, if we're wrong, I'm wrong. I'm just trying to help you. That's like his very nice, I try to help people. You're happy and disagree? Okay. But then he says that when I did on this, and of course the things that people had problems with were mostly not the halachos. Although, you could argue on many halachos, but that's not the thing that he was attacked for, not in this case. It was mostly the thoughts or the opinions that he wrote down. And then he says like this. I'm not going to read for you. You can read, I'm just going to tell you what it says. And the Kasha nechlas l'zeh. It says when I've got to do this, I saw that I can't, if I'm going to write a book that's going to make easier and closer to people, the mitzvahs, I can't do, it would be very unfair or very unreasonable to clarify, to make closer and easier to people what he calls Sefer, the branches of the Torah, and leave the roots unclarified, let you be ignorant of the roots. So that's this is getting us to a second point over here. And he says, I've already and he goes on to say that I've met people that have been very big Talmud Chachamim in the not the roots, what's the opposite of the roots, in the branches of the Torah. They knew many details and many halachas, but they didn't know if God had a body or not. And so on.
Is this like what you were saying last week about first you have to be a certain kind of person? Meaning that what he's doing Sefer Hamada?
Maybe here he's talking about having the correct opinions. It's connected to that, but we have to go backwards for that to work. He says, I'm going to explain them. It's of course has to do with that, but he's not saying that they don't have good midas. He's saying that they have the wrong opinions, which he thinks is very bad.
I'm saying the whole idea of having Sefer Hamada period.
Yeah, so there's two ideas. So you notice what he said here is like this. What he said here is that already a second thing, right? So the first thing is closer to what you're saying. That's why I said there's 2 points really. The first point is the Rambam thinks, and of course Aristotle thinks this, and of course you should think it, but anyways you should also know it. He thinks that the point of everything, it would be weird to say the point as if it's like a separate thing. You want to be what you're all looking for is to be what's called a perfect person or a better person, just like your car is trying to be a good car, right? Which means drive and do all the other things that cars do. Mostly get you from point A to point B in comfort and so on. And the human is trying to human well, right? Now, he thinks that the main thing, right? This is the argument from the beginning of the ethics. The main thing that you do well, or what it defines to be you, is what you yourself can do and nobody else can do, right? Because of course, I am also a physical being who falls with gravity and has mass and all kind of things like that. But probably that's not why I am specifically what I am, because that I'm sheer with everything that is a body or something like that, right? And probably also I eat, and by eating I grow, and there's like the whole perfection of the body, which is definitely closer to what I am than being a rock, right? But still isn't what makes me a human person, it just makes me an animal. So I share that with animals. And of course there's nothing bad with that. It's just not it's like you saying a car is a great paperweight, which it is, if you really need to hold on a big piece of paper. But that's obviously it has some things, it's something going on besides for it being a heavy piece of metal and stuff, right? They say, well, a car can move things, moves, right? And they say, well, horses move too. So obviously cars are doing something, and maybe they're moving in a different way, or maybe they're moving faster, or maybe they're moving by burning fuels or by having a battery or whatever. There's something else that makes a car, and to be a good car, it's not enough to move, right? And it's definitely not enough to be pulled by something else, right? If you have a car that you have to connect to a horse in order for it to drive, it's very nice at moving, but it's not a car, right? Not an automobile. Well, maybe it's a car, whatever we're defining. So the same way, this is like the basic argument that a human being, in order to be a human, has got to be good at the things that humans do. Yeah, sure. There's people that should be able to find it. And therefore, right, you know this, right? And therefore, if we think according to Aristotle and all these and everyone else, the thing that humans do best or specifically do is knowing. Therefore, you got to know the right things, right? Now, this also means, just to connect it back to like something more realistic, it also means that if you don't do that well, you'll be a bad human in every way, right? We discussed this. You can't really be like a good animal without knowledge, because really the way like animals might, maybe they have a kind of knowledge, but the kind of knowledge that humans have, or the level of planning that humans have, you can't actually eat correctly without using your knowledge.
Falls perfectly with gravity is not a good animal.
Yeah, and not only that, in the analogy that you're thinking of, something like an animal, in order not to fall, needs to be animal things, right? Because otherwise it will just fall.
Compares to falling also.
Yeah?
Meaning organizationally.
Yeah, even in some sense, of course, you'd say the parts that make up the animal will fall no matter if it's a healthy animal or not. But the animal, in order not to fall, has to also be a healthy animal, right? So it's not, gravity is not enough. Even to fulfill the like lower functions, you need to use them in the higher way. And the same thing, a human being will not be able to eat without applying his mind. Or at least humans as a society, maybe one human might be able to, but humanity definitely won't be able to, because we only feed ourselves by using our mind and by organizing and by killing the lions and so on. So anyways, that's why it's important for every human being to know the correct things. And that's also why, like this is sort of why you'll notice that people with bad beliefs have bad actions too. So this is really backwards, but in other words, we have to first say it the right way, right? Since this is what humans do, it means you have to know, because knowing is the thing that makes humans different than everything else. And therefore you got to know the truth. And of course, there's some complications here that this is not a class on that, because we always get into the classes on this. But the point is, you got to know the important things, or the most basic things, which are the most knowable things. And therefore, what a human is for is to know the greatest things, or the most basic things, might be a better word, which means knowing God and how the rest of the world connects to that. Right? And and since the rule with everything that has a higher function, which is made out of lower functions, is that you can't even have the lower ones without the higher ones, turns out that people that don't know the correct God and things like that turn out to be very bad human beings also at doing the other things that you might think that humans are good at, like organizing their society and things like that. Turns out you can't, it's not clear that the Rambam entirely believes this, but it turns out that it's hard at least to organize a society without a belief and without correct beliefs, whatever the correct ones are. Okay, because the point is that they're correct, not that they're useful. At least in backwards, there's a point that they could be useful without being correct, but at least in the positive way, they have to be correct. Okay. Now, in any case, and this is why. So now this is number one. So this is number one. So this is why he says, like, first thing he says, like, I've met a guy that didn't know what kind of God exists. That's very bad to him. Like, just as a good person that cares about other people, he wants to explain this guy what kind of God exists, or that God exists, because the God that's a body according to Rambam isn't a God at all. So that's just a good thing that he wants to do. in general. Okay, that's step number one. So therefore, since, and now this since is going to lead us to step number two. Since when you say the whole Torah, you say Kol Torah Kula, that's not some random thing that can just be said, like words or obligations or something like that. Whatever the Torah consists of must be the same as the good way, or at least a good way, to be a human being. Because the Torah is for human beings, and it's nothing but the perfection of human beings. Right? This is actually important, because someone could say the Torah is for the purpose of God, or something like that. The Rambam doesn't believe that, or even if in the sense that he does believe that God's purpose is this. So you can't say something like, this changes everything, but we can't, right? You can't say something like, well, the Torah is just this list of things to do, and it doesn't make any difference if it makes you a better or worse person in any sense. For the Rambam, that would be nonsense, and for many reasons. So what the Torah is a kind of way, or the way. Of course, the way, but at least a way. We try to be minimalistic. At least a way to be a good human being. Right? And since the Torah is a way to be a good human being, and to be a good human being means to know, at least as the most ultimate goal of human being is to know, and secondarily, that the human's knowledge actually leads his actions. So you're going to have the correct opinions in order to have a Torah. So it wouldn't be correct. It would be something very deeply wrong with a Torah that gives you only actions and not values, not but truths. A Torah that only gives you actions and not truths, literally, he says in Chelek Beis, would not be a divine Torah. It would be a human Torah. It might be useful in some sense. Like I said, it's not clear if it's actually useful. It might be useful in some basic sense, but it wouldn't be divine. Because divine means the real perfection. That's why.
What do you mean?
Now I'm going to get confused with this. But anyways, it means that if there would be a Torah is just another word here. Like, again, when we say Torah, that has two meanings, right? And the one is, you could say the Torah, like when most people would say Torah, they mean whatever is printed in those books. Doesn't matter if it connects to anything else. But when the Rambam says Torah, it means something more like law, or maybe you could say social order, or maybe the good social order, right? Now, that's why, in that sense, you could say there might be multiple Torahs. Some of them might be better than others. But, in other words, right, in the more philosophical, more general sense, it would be very weird to say there's only one Torah. Of course, there's Torahs HaGoyim and Torahs HaChristians and Torahs HaMuslims. They might be bad ones, but they're a Torah in the definition of what it is, right? And therefore, you could think of, now, the Rambam says, I'm going to skip over this, I'm saying this because it connects to a lot of things, but the Rambam says something like this, that you could think of a Torah or a regime, a politics, a republic, a thing, a way of life, or a way of life, not only for one person, for society, which would not have anything to do with truths. You could think of something. We could imagine something like that. And the Rambam actually imagines things like that. He thinks that the pagan ways of life were sort of like this. Plato might think something like this. We're sort of a way of having a humanity, a society, a city, a state, without truths, based on what is useful, not on what is true, not on based. In other words, our laws, by the way, for example, this is complicated, but it's people very much, at least assume that liberal states have laws that have nothing to do with the truth. The laws are not here. The law of the United States of America doesn't teach you the truth, right? And doesn't speak in the name of the truth either. It speaks in the name of something like a useful society, or right. So people shouldn't kill each other, some kind of useful good, but it doesn't teach you truth. And explicitly doesn't, right? Because that's the whole idea of liberalism. The state explicitly doesn't do that. It doesn't care for your soul, right? It doesn't educate you as to what kind of person you'll be. It explicitly says, we don't care. We don't get involved in the question of what a good person is. We only get involved in don't harm other people, which of course is very hard to define without knowing what a good person is, so we get into trouble. But I don't know, it might be some kind of halfway pshuta in some sense. But in any case, that's the official. It's not hard. We can definitely imagine a state or order, or a life order, or a society order, which is based on something like we all agree that we don't like to kill each other, so we're going to have one law: don't kill each other, and that's all. And then we'll add a bunch of other things, and so on. And we'll enforce the laws for our own good, and so on. But it's not going. We're not going to teach you any truths. Right? There's not going to be any knowledge in our. Nobody will know anything, or we don't at least care about anyone knowing anything. And the Rambam says something like this. That would be a very nice whether it would work or not. He doesn't talk about this. Like nowadays, we have a lot of the question would that work? He doesn't care about it. Would it work? He seems to assume that it would work less good than the one which has truths, but doesn't really get into that question. But he does say that would be the definition of a Torah that's not min hashamayim. That's exactly what it means. Because what does a divine order mean, right? Divine order doesn't, for him in that chapter, doesn't mean it comes from there. Because someone could say, and this is why it's different than when people have discussions, saying like, will people kill unless they have the divine command, right? Is the only way to stop people from killing telling them that God told them not to kill, right? Or is it enough that the state tells you not to kill, or your father told you not to kill, or someone? Now, and according to that theory of how the good works, right? The divine command theory, or the way that most liquid people think, the Torah being from heaven, being divine, isn't a property of the Torah, it's just a history of the Torah. You see, we always get back to the same thing. Right?
People kind of weave a lot.
Yeah, I'm sure people think intuitively more than this, but that's what they officially say. Right? In other words, the Torah being divine is just a question of history, not of what the Torah is. Right? The Torah came from God. It was once there, now it's here, or it's however exactly you tell the story, but it's a historical fact. That's why history becomes. I remember this leads you into the whole drusha about history. But anyway,
Versus saying it's a living organism.
Versus saying that divine is a kind of Torah, right? So there's two kinds of Torahs, two kinds of orders, political orders or human orders. One order is the one that makes you a good human being for the sense of being a good social animal, even. You could say something like that. And the second is the one that makes you good for God. Like the divine completion of the human. Which is, like you could say words, but it's like what God intended, but it's not like God sitting there and intending things. It's more like the divine part of the human, right? Or the most akin to divine, this is complicated, the most akin to divine part of the human, which is his intellect. In other words, or his soul, we could say. Right? In other words, the Torah that also not only makes sure that you have a good body or a good social order, it also makes sure you have a good soul. And now good soul by definition can only mean knowing the truth. That is a divine Torah, because God is the truth. Or the truth is God. And the knowing of the truth is the human, divining, right? Like knowing God. The Rambam doesn't like getting into these descriptions, how these things look, because the problem is once you talk about that too much, you start sounding too Hasidish, and the Rambam doesn't like to sound Hasidish. So it's problematic. But in any case, the best ways of describing these kind of things are Hasidish language. But the point is, that's what a divine Torah is. Divine Torah, a divine law, right? Divine order is the one which gets you to the divine. In other words, which is not only teaches ways, actions.
It guides people there.
It is heaven. Yeah. Not guiding you to heaven. Heaven, maybe. It is heaven. It's heavenly in the sense of caring about the part of you that is in heaven, or caring about the part of you that gets to heaven. Because your body doesn't go to heaven, your soul goes to heaven. And whatever the explanation for this means.
So it's divine because of its concerns, not because of its origin.
Yes, exactly. It's divine because of its essence, not because of its origin. Of course, in some sense, that means the same thing, but it's divine in its goal, in its ends, not in its, you could say something easier. It's divine as its goal is divine, and its origin, the origin of everything is divine. That's why it's not really interesting to say that the origin of Torah is divine, because God is the origin, in the sense of the active cause, how's it called? For everything, so it doesn't make a difference. But anyways, that's a divine Torah, and that's very clear for him. So the Torah being divine doesn't mean its origin, its history is divine. It means that its essence is divine. In other words, it cares about knowledge and not only about action. Or you could say it cares about your soul and not only about your body. Of course, someone could give a different version of this and saying, yeah, because the Torah brings you to Gan Eden, which is for your soul, and it doesn't have to have any causal connection, like why does this Torah bring it? And the Rambam doesn't accept that. For the Rambam, there needs to be a science or causality.
Okay.
Yeah, you could say, people would say this, right? It's very normal to say well, the Goyish law is just good for your body, and the Torah is also good for your soul.
Meaning what you're saying is, let's say, for example, it says respect your parents, right? So if you're respecting your parents just because you believe in it, not necessarily because it's from God.
So what does this mean? So that's still step one. I have to get on the answer in step two this question. So now the thing is like this. Okay, so this is all why for a Torah, any Torah, any divine Torah actually. Now we made it a little clearer. any divine Torah, anything that speaks about what the Rambam calls the second completion of the second perfection of a human, what really makes him human, which is also what really makes him like divine or eternal or things like that, is going to be the correct opinions, the knowledge, at least correct opinion, if b'diavad, but really ideally knowledge, and that is has to be included in the Torah. So just now, then you could say things like this. You could say, and therefore the Rambam so he could have he could have wrote he could have just went around to all the shuls and tell them Rabbi say you should know the truth. But he had this great tool called Sefer halachos, and everyone reads Sefer halachos. So that was his trick of getting everyone to know the truth. That's like one sort of somewhat cynical way of saying it.
You're saying the whole Mishnah Torah was Hamada?
No, but you might as well. If you have a podium, like you have a pulpit, you have to use it to say the good things. So the Rambam does have this kind of thing. Like he has in Perishah Mishnah, it's like, this is not really about the subject, but once we're here, I'm going to tell you a whole drasha about the correct opinions, and just because it's important. Like once we're here, you might as well use it for I don't know if it's only because of that, of course, yeah. But then there's a second thing. And the second thing has to do with what you were saying about, like, what do you do with all the mitzvahs? And the second thing is that the Rambam, because of this, or unrelated to this, but somehow connected to this, says something deeper, right? It says something more about what the Torah, the actual mitzvahs are. In other words, all of them, okay? Because someone could say that mitzvahs are actually actions, and many people generally, like, isn't like halacha, of like, Lav Shem V'Masas, okay, you can't get Einish, there's not really whatever, but in general, Judaism is mostly orthoprax, mostly based with practice, not with thought, not with truth. And someone would say, okay, so the halachos are about practice, then unrelated to that, you got to know the truth, or you don't, maybe because our Torah doesn't care, maybe you're wrong, and so on. Now, the Rambam says something very different, and it's really, really under-theorized, under-explained in people that I've seen, like how this part happened. Because most people have like first half of the story, but this is something very important, and he says something deeper than that. He says that the Torah, and this is the Rambam invented the concept called Ikrei Adas, right? Roots of the law. Ikr means a root, right? Like the root or the trunk of a tree. And the Rambam said that the entire Torah, this whole system of 613 laws, I don't like the word laws, but whatever, 613 rules or mitzvahs, have an internal structure. So they don't only have like an external structure, like they're about different things or they come from somewhere. They have an internal structure. An internal structure means an internal unity. So they all have, just like if you go on a tree and see like a bunch of leaves, and it's like this tree has 1,000 leaves, but if you're a scientist or if you understand the tree, you don't really think trees don't have 1,000 leaves. Tree has like one trunk and 7 branches, and then each branch has sub-branches or whatever they're called, and each branch has such and such leaves, and that's what makes the tree a unity, like one thing, right? It has some kind of logic, it makes sense, it works. Nature works like that, or that's our understanding of nature works like that. And the Rambam has the same thing about the Torah. And this is something that, again, I don't know if anyone before him or noticed this. People after him have noticed this and taken him up on the task, like who says that your structure is correct and so on. But he very clearly said this. And he said that the Torah has some mitzvahs, and there are also mitzvahs. Not outside of the Torah, there are also mitzvahs. Some of the mitzvahs, and I'm going to tell you which, and maybe you could argue about some of them, but in general, some mitzvahs are the roots of the Torah. So roots in the sense of this is the ones that the other ones are based on, or really a better way of conceptualizing is these are the ones that the other ones are leading to. Right? These are the ends, these are the goals, these are the points of the other ones. Now all the other mitzvahs exist in the Torah as branches of these, or as directions to these. There's just two ways of looking at the same thing and sort of.
That's the division of how far it is removed from the core mitzvah. Because, I mean, I guess what's odd about this is not all the branches are in it. I think even he would agree to that, right?
All of them are in this one tree, yeah. Some of them are very far from the root.
Everything that leads to, even on like a one level removed, everything that leads to, let's say, whatever the Torah's goal is, right? Everything that's one step removed from that is in the Torah. And everything that's one step, meaning it's
there's some problems.
It cuts out a bunch of, out of the 7 branches, it has like 5 of them, and of that 5, it has like most of the sub branches and some twigs.
There's 14 branches. Anyways, no. In other words, you could ask two opposite questions. One is, does everything in the Torah actually fit into your tree? And the other one is, does this tree that you're creating include everything that's needed for the...
Right.
You're asking the second question.
Yeah, or like...
The second question is easy because we have a bunch of catch-all mitzvahs. Like, do all the right things. Like, so the Rambam really believes in these catch-all mitzvahs. They're not good as laws. They're very bad laws because the law can't just say, like, be good. And like Google, don't do evil. Thank you very much. That's why they're evil. Because they don't have any other mitzvahs. If they would have thought of it, right? But the Rambam does, there is such mitzvahs. And the Ramban, even the Rambam, there's different concepts. There are such mitzvahs which like basically say, besides for all the things that... Yeah, the Rambam discusses this. And the Rambam, like besides for all the things I told you, just be a mensch. Like, don't...
The problem is that people could use that however they want.
Okay, that's a problem. But I'm just telling you, like, that's like theoretically it answers the question of like, does this branch breathe out? I think the more important side of this for the Rambam is, again, that there is this relationship of root and branches within the Torah. The Torah, the mitzvahs themselves have a structure, a root-branch structure, which is like a logical structure, right? Because that's how, at least Aristotle's logic works, by putting everything in the trees. And, right, foundationalism, everything comes down to one thing or goes to one thing. And he puts the whole Torah into this. And in some sense, this is why he does, or this is how and why he does this whole thing of categorization and bigger levels categories and smaller levels category. They're all to fit this all into this one unit here, this one goal or this one basic root, which are themselves some of the mitzvahs. This is an interesting thing. He could have said the roots are outside of the mitzvahs, but he didn't like that. He wanted the roots to be part of the tree, to be part of the mitzvahs.
The mitzvahs span the trunk branches.
Yes, there is all kind. So this is very interesting. So unlike what the Mishnah says, the Rambam actually has like a very weird shot on that Mishnah. If you look at it, it's like we're usually taught like have a zor b'mitzvah like have a Hamada shiyat yodeh about the schanash mitzvahs, which says like there's just 6 lists. That's a long list. It doesn't make any difference. And the Rambam himself has like language where he says things like this. But if you really understand, he definitely doesn't. I've written about this at length sometimes. He definitely doesn't believe that. He believes that there are more. You can't say the word important because when you say important, you start thinking, well, maybe I don't need to do the other ones. But you could say more basic, right? There's more basic mitzvahs and less basic mitzvahs, and there's probably more than one level of this. There's definitely more than one level of this. I mean, everyone knows that there's more levels, like there's the Rabbanan, there's Yagla Torah, but even within the Torah, what? Yeah, right, and the Chazal said we shouldn't do that, but anyway.
Just like we know is because of like...
according to the Rambam, yes, that's like one of the weak ways of him pushing things in, but at least...
Easy hierarchical one.
But it's easy to see, and not only, so it's interesting, right, so there are more and less important, and more or less basic, like we don't say the word important, but the more or less basic mitzvahs, and there's even second level, and in the Torah, like in the Mamish, the Raise, not only the Rabbanan, not only... and this is actually interesting. I'm gonna skip to the Torah. I'm gonna say about this.
The chain, right?
No, the Rabbanans are by definition not going to be at the first or second levels. I think the way the Rambam wants it to be, although not necessarily, but I think he usually would say it that way because there's reasons why it shouldn't be. Why? Well, you can't have the Rabbanan the Iker because that would be very weird. See, that's what gets us to step 3, which is what he says here. That therefore, now that I told you that the Torah itself has roots and branches. Now, this is the real reason why, or like the Kavachomer reason, like the deeper reason why he needs to include the roots in his book, which is the Torah. Because it would be very, very weird, not only very weird, it would be illogical, impossible, incoherent, would be like bad to have a tree with only leaves without roots. Well, you could actually ask why.
Today we have that kind today we have a kind of roots branches structure. We see it as more socially created than logically created. People say, let's say Shabbos, Kashrus, Taras, Mishpacha, right? As the 3.
Okay, so let me add a fourth step here. Okay, so let me add a fourth step here. So let's say like this. We have to differentiate now. So now I said, number 1, it's important as a human being to know this. Therefore, we gotta tell you them, and we're gonna use any device we have, including the device of writing it into halacha, which is like the best device for Judaism. If you think about it, like the best way of convincing Jews that something is important is to say it's halacha. And this has been going on for a long time.
Like used against me on multiple occasions.
Yeah, it's a good tool. But the point is you should use it too for good reasons. You've got to find the halachos that help you. You got to find the halachos that help people. That's true, by the way. Well, that's a different... Like, the job of a rabbi isn't to know all the halachos. It's to know the halachos, which ones to apply and when, in which situation, Like.
Pressure points,
What?
Pressure points.
Yeah, no, like a doctor. The Rambam says like a doctor. Like a doctor, besides for knowing how everything works and like what he has to know, which problem you have and which medicine is going to help for you. And sometimes there's Lashem, you got to use, the medicines that are harmful in some ways. And anyways, point is that this, of course, also only works if you have a structure, right? Because if things have no goal, then nobody knows. It's very problematic. If everything is equally important, then who knows? Maybe you should, not care. Like people always say things like this, and it's good rhetoric for some things, but it's not really true, right? From people like saying, no, how does it go? No, we don't make deals with God. We're not here to maximize the amount of mitzvahs. If I'm going to be mad to you one thing and that's going to lead you to do a bunch of other bad things, I don't care. I'm going to just tell you the truth. Do you know such rhetoric? I forgot what it's called. There's like a word for it.
Question you asked kind of thing. That kind of talk.
Like the end doesn't justify the means, right? Or if I am not allowed to. It's problematic because people are, whenever you say things like this, you're exposing yourself to manipulation and things. I understand why they say this. But, people say like, even if the Briskirov says, even if Mashiach comes, you're not allowed to do one Rabbanan Isser. That doesn't make any sense. Doesn't even make any sense. But this is his way of, and they say things like this, like, if there's all kinds of cases where like, if we're going to be mad at this, then at least people will marry Jews, something like that. And I say, I don't care. My job is not to make people marry Jews. My job is to tell it, all the laws are equal. Well, okay, if they're all equal, then why you realize that this being passive doesn't actually solve this problem. But that's another thing, right?
Yeah, right, but I'm saying you see throughout history that Chazal has gone, like they almost squashed the Torah.
Yeah, they
because they have a logical structure.
But that only works if you sort of know which one is more important. Because if you have no idea which one is more important, then maybe actually, I don't know, having a mechitza and shul is more important than people marrying Jews. And therefore, if let's say, and these cases are weird because they're always people going to manipulate you by saying this, I'm going to go to TD if you don't do this or whatever. Like, what do you want from my life? Figure it out yourself. But, you can't use it as a threat because that's a problem. But in reality, if someone says like something like, why do I say all these stupid social examples? Right? If you can have no mechitza in your shul, then people will come to shul and they'll end up staying Jews, they'll marry Jews, or whatever, they'll believe in God, I don't know, whatever, something basic. And you say, I don't care, the Moshe Feinstein needed mechitza, and it's not my job to worry about people marrying Jews. Right. And of course you could say, I don't know the future, these are speculations, and said that that's a different argument, but the actual argument is wrong. Because of course the mechitza is less important than people marrying Jews. How do I know? I don't know. It's by the way, it's like I know it because it says in the Rambam, it's a tradition, but it's actually weird because marrying a non-Jew is not even a deres. It's complicated. Who knows? But anyways, it's important.
You do run into a lot of issues that way.
Yeah. I understand why it's a problem to say these things.
You then do whatever you want.
100%. But I understand that it's a problem to say it. That's why this is a theoretical shit. Not telling you what to do. I understand the baya, and I understand why people say the other things. But at least in the sense of the ideology, it's actually wrong. Of course, even now people can argue which things are more important, which things are more basic. But obviously there are some things that are more basic, and some things that are ways to get to that. And sometimes it's obvious. I mean, halachos, Shabbos achas, whatever. There's ways there which it's obvious, and ways which it's not. I don't know where I get to this. I'm just getting to this thing the radical idea that says that all the mitzvahs are the same. They're all level one. It's not true. Nobody really believes that. Even between mitzvahs that are the rice, and we have things like there's halachos already that deal with these kind of questions. It's not things that we have to make up all by ourselves. But obviously there is such a hierarchy. The Rambam is special or unique and taking extremely seriously this hierarchy, which is built in some sense based on his mind and his way of how the hierarchy should be. Of course, there's Maimonides Chazal for everything and so on. It's hard to know where it comes from. But
so you should see the Torah by the fact that like certain mitzvahs have certain ancient versus others. I mean, you don't get killed for everything, right?
Yes.
Then you see God doing that Himself.
Yes, but that's not right. That's not. It's not clear that that's a good. Whatever. It's complicated. There's many ways to divide like what is more important. Anshim might not be the best one. That's what. By the way, I think that's the Rambam pshat, or that's at least one pshat on Shiat Yedem HaTzichon Shel Mitzvahs, because the schar is not always what defines what's more important. Because sometimes less important things have bigger anshim for various random reasons. Yeah, maybe for this. Like I told you, like marrying a guy is one of the worst things that you can do as a Jew. But it's actually very hard to prosecute you for it in a bezdin because there's nothing they can do about it. because it's not a law. Like maybe it's the Rabbanon, maybe it's the Machlokes, maybe it's the Eisen, maybe it's some ways nobody really knows. Point is, that the Gemara like clearly makes you clearly understand that this is essentially a more important thing, but halachically a less important thing. So the halacha and the reality don't match for various reasons, and you could explain why. In any case, that's why I use that example. Point is, the Rambam, but because of this, now we're going back to teaching, right? So now I have to say, that's why I have to say this is even more important what he does, right? So you could say something like this. You could say, okay, of course, theoretically in God's mind, or in the Talmud Chacham that understands the Torah, it's true that there's some kind of hierarchy, right? There's some kind of tree. Hierarchy sounds bad. When you say tree, it sounds nicer, right? There's a tree of life. Yeah, that's called a hierarchy in English. Anyways, but a hierarchy like makes you think of like a king with a minister, but a tree is like a nice tree with branches. It's so cool. Huh? You could just change the metaphor and people like it. Anyways, living organism, yeah. All living organisms have a hierarchy. Almost all of them, but like snails, they could cut off their feet and that's weird kind of thing. Anyways, all complex living organisms, but the level of complexity have more hierarchy. Anyways, I don't know why I'm getting to this. Point is that you could say that there is an organism, there is a unity, right? You could use the word unity. There is like a connection between everything, but it's not important for you to know. This is really what we discussed talking about, like maybe it's irrelevant for a yid to know which mitzvah is more important. You got to do all of them. What difference does it make to you, right? And really, it's a good question. What difference does it make to you? So therefore, someone could say something like this: there's 613 mitzvahs. Okay, let's agree to Mr. Rambam. One of the mitzvahs is knowing that there's a God. The second one is knowing that there's one God. The third one is nothing else. Okay, I've done 611 mitzvahs. Well, so I forgot one of them. I don't understand one of them, right? That's the guy that the Rambam is describing here. He does all the mitzvahs, even though there's a lot of details of Hilchas Miktzah and Nida and Chvayis. But he doesn't know if God has a body. So that's like a sifkut in one mitzvah. Okay, what do you want from my life? I don't know one mitzvah. I know a lot of them. Okay, it's true. It would be better to know all of them, but I missed one. Right? And now, the Rambam took this further, and this probably only goes back to the first thing that we said. And he said that would be extremely absurd, because that would be like someone that knows all the leaves of a tree but doesn't know the root. And what's the problem with that? I think that in most basic problem is that you can't, well, trees are weird, and all organic things are weird, that it doesn't always work like this, but you can't plant a tree that way. If you get together all the branches and you put it in your house, tomorrow you won't have a tree. But if you get the root without some branches even, and you put it in your house, tomorrow you'll have roots, right? So the roots give you the branches, but the branches don't give you the roots. And in the somewhat analogous way, the Rambam thinks that if someone has all the branches of the mitzvah but doesn't have the roots, well, his mitzvahs don't work, or it's going to die tomorrow, or it's going to be much less valuable. It's going to be sort of...
together?
Yeah, it would probably be useless, because remember that roots here means ends, not only causes. It means final causes also, right? It means ends. And therefore, like if you... it would be like someone, who has a beautiful car but doesn't push the gas pedal or something like that, or doesn't drive, and therefore the whole car is useless, right? Not only it doesn't have what to stand on, doesn't go anywhere, doesn't do anything. And since he knows the goal of the Torah being to get to these roots or to get to these ends, so it turns out to be extremely important to not only theoretically, not only that the Torah itself has the ends, but for the Torah to be taught in a way that emphasizes these ends. And this is a third thing that the Rambam does that nobody else did before him, or not at least not in the extreme way that he did, which is that he thought that we have to teach the Torah in the logical order, in the order of roots, branches, so on. And this brings him to do his order of mitzvahs, and there's problems with this. This leads to some basic issues that he has, but it leads him to organize his order of mitzvahs. So he assumes that someone will open the book and start from page 1. Reasonable way of reading books, although I don't read books that way. Sounds reasonable at least. So the Rambam did and said this, and if you look in my first source that I brought you, this is literally what he says about Sefer Hamada. It says, where's my thing? It says like this. It says, my first book is going to be Sefer Hamada, and Sefer Rishon Echlel Be'Kol HaMitzvos Shain Iker Das Moshe Rabbeinu, the main, so Iker, in other words, the roots, right? The mitzvahs that are the roots. Okay, so it theoretically makes sense for this to be the first or the more basic one. But he adds something. He says, besides for them being the roots, a person must know them before, first to everything. So this is the Rambam's educational theory, besides for his like philosophical, theoretical theory of the Torah. And the Rambam repeats this in other places, like it literally describes how to teach children, literally describes how to teach a ger. If some guy comes and says, teach me the Torah. So unlike Hillel, who says, like, after the Rambam says there is one God and no other. And it literally says this in halachos Isur Biyan, where it describes how to become a ger. And it literally doesn't have any source over there. He made it up himself. He's like literally quoting a Mishnah, and he added this line into the Mishnah. And yeah, look it up. In Isur Biyan, I don't remember where. There's like a chapter where the Rambam gives halachos geras, and he describes a Mishnah which says that a ger comes, Medina is a miktas mitzvah, something like that. And the Rambam just goes and adds in by himself. And of course, the first thing you tell him is Yichad Hashem v'Yisrael v'Dezera and Ikra Adas. Of course, I'm sure he'll have a good answer if you ask him why the Mishnah didn't say it. But it's very obvious that this is something that he did. So that's the fourth level of what the Rambam thinks. So he also thinks that it's the thing that must be taught first. And why must it be taught first? Because it's sort of like the Rambam says in I didn't quote this here, but in Perish HaMishnah, where he gives the Yidgol Me'ikrim, he says, like literally like the example that I gave you about the tree. He says that this is the minimum, right? So this is besides for being the first thing, it turns out to also be the minimum thing. And for this he has some good sources. As the minimal thing of being a Jew is to have this. Now the Rambam says, and he gives like the most extreme example, you could be over at all 612 mitzvahs and be a good Jew, as long as you're not doing it halachos, whatever, it's hard for you. Okay, you're still counted for a minyan or whatever. It's not clear what is like the nafkamina halacha, but you're still considered a Jew. That's the Rambam's definition. But if you don't do one mitzvah, even if you do all the other 612, he doesn't use the word mitzvahs there, he calls them 13 ikrim, but it really boils down to one mitzvah, then you're not a Jew, even if you do all of them. And the one mitzvah is the existence of God. And over there he adds more things, but I think that it's one is enough. And this is like the most extreme version of not only is these important, not only are these like the more basic categories or the more root parts of the Torah, not only are these roots the causes or the ends of the other ones, but not only must they be taught first, they're also the minimum amount of Judaism that you need. And sort of another way of saying this, if you want to say in the most radical way, is that it's enough. Of course, it's not really enough, and it's a question why it's not really enough. The basic answer would be something like that there's a reason why these things are ways to that end, and it's at least very hard to get to it without them, or something like that, at least for society and so on. But it's enough. Even halachically, he thinks that it's minimally enough. Like, as long as you don't have a desert, as long as you believe in a God, you're a good person. At least as person, you could say that. As Jew, it becomes a little more complicated, but he definitely believes that. And you can have chaylik l'olam haba. Like, yes, kol Yisrael, this is the Rambam's Perish on the Mishnah. Kol Yisrael yesh l'hem chaylik l'olam haba, said the Rambam. Yisrael here doesn't mean someone was born to a Jewish mother. It means someone who believes in God. If you believe in God, he literally says, even if you don't believe in the Torah, but nobody really knows this, but it says it beferish, and somewhere, at least according to my interpretation, that you're a relatively good person. But if you don't believe in God, even if you do everything else, you're not a good person at all. And again, it's not entirely clear to explain why this. Maybe this is just a very extreme example, and once you get to the really extreme, real, actual examples, then things are more complicated. But it's just like a very clear way of bringing out his point of the importance of these, both for the essence and for the education. And this is why he writes this first. This book he writes first. That of course leads us to a basic problem, because I'm not going to solve this problem. I'm just going to tell you that leads us to a basic problem, which is that the Rambam doesn't. Of course, this knowledge is not saying, and saying is a minimum for that too, like correct opinion. But it really means understanding. And like the Rambam says, you need to even understand that God doesn't have a body, which is like his great radical innovation in Judaism. Nobody before that thought that this was important. And the Rav came and said, I don't know what you want from my life. It's true, but why is it important to know? And the Rambam made this most important. It's like a detail in what God is, right? And it's like a philosophical detail even. Of course, there's tradition for it. I'm not here to argue with it. I'm just here to say like how radical, how innovative it is. And when you realize this, you realize that there's a basic problem. Like, if the most important things are the minimum, the most final things, the most greatest ends are the minimum things also, That's sort of a contradiction, because, like I said before, you can't really go this way. Like the Rambam has this like extreme example of someone that only knows there's a God and doesn't do anything else, and maybe like there's a philosopher.
There's a question of where to enter the circle, right?
Yeah. There's no circle here.
Meaning the correct beliefs, motivate the correct actions.
The goal, right? So the goal is here the correct knowledge. But the problem here is
that's the top of the circle, but it's still a circle.
The problem here is something more basic. The problem is that this final knowledge, this ultimate perfect knowledge, is something that you need a lot of preparation to get to. Because nobody really understands what it means to not be a body unless you understand what it means to be a body. And what it means to be a body means understanding all of physics. Or, again, the basics of physics, of Aristotelian physics, which are based on bodies, unlike modern physics, which is not really based on bodies, but that's a different thing. And understanding, what if you say even more things, like God is necessary, you need to understand logic and metaphysics. And basically, nobody understands this unless they're very advanced in philosophy. In order to be advanced in philosophy, like you said, you need first to be a good person, because bad people don't understand philosophy. And you need to also be healthy. You need to be a lot of things. So basically, it's really unrealistic. And Ram does something very unrealistic, where he starts his book by giving you a summary of all of physics and metaphysics. And he says this, I'm going to do this. And he knows that nobody's going to understand his summary. Or you know the words, but you not really understand what's going on. And why is he doing this? Because he's living in this contradiction. On the one hand, the most basic things are the most advanced things. But because they're the most advanced, everyone needs to know them. It's not really clear what his solution ultimately to this conflict is, or what a solution can be. Especially, and I'll make it clear, especially because he's not an elitist. Okay, in other words, as a religious person, at least, he's not an elitist. In other words, you could be a philosopher. You could be a radical elitist philosopher and say, of course, most people will not know the basic thing, and that's just how life is. Most people will enter never into heaven. Most people, right? Like Christianity is sort of based on this kind of negative view of human. But philosophies, most versions of philosophy, or many of them, are based on something like this. And many people, the Rambam read and said things explicitly like this. My friend Praklis is very much explicitly like this. Most people will never know anything, because they don't even know what knowing means. They watch movies, they don't read philosophy, which is in Plato's language. They're lovers of sights and sounds and not lovers of the forms. And in English, it's watching movies and not reading philosophy. And there's no hope for them. Their soul was the gilgul of an animal, whatever. But that's Praklis' way of saying it. The point is, and the Rambam was read, Ibn Rushd said things like this, there's no hope. The most, you'll tell them God is a light. Oh, what's the difference? Whatever. At least make one big, it's not really helping us. Now the Rambam, as part of Moshe's thing, as a student of Moses, the Moshe Maimonides, as a student of Moshe Rabbeinu, does not believe like this for some reason. He really, really wants and this is because of a lot of things, but he really wants every Yid, at least, and probably every person, to know God. He just wants that. It's not really rational. It's not based on an assessment of the abilities of every human. It's based on a hope, more of a cold, hard assessment. And that's my opinion. I don't know. And this is why the Rambam is really romantic, or really, really hopeful, really messianic. And he does this crazy thing of starting his book, in which he assumes that he hopes in his day, he knows that in his day it didn't work, but he hopes in the future, when Mashiach comes, the Rambam will be the basic curriculum in schools. You go to Cheder, they'll teach you Chumash and Rambam. That's what the Rambam wants. And they'll open the first page and they'll start talking about forms and matter and forms and 10 Malachim and God and necessary existence and all kinds of things. And the children will say, yeah, I got it. I don't know if they'll get it, but at least somehow he doesn't have this philosophic yish.
What would be his other option?
Well, the other option would be to do what normally what other people do, is tell people the laws, because we need them to not kill each other. That's important, also for us at least, and not tell them the truth.
Right, but the question is, meaning according to this belief that you said.
Yeah, they'll never go to anywhere. No use.
No, that's fine, but at least for the people that could understand, it should be there.
Yeah, you could say this, but it's the people that could understand have this thing that they don't need the Rambam. The people that could understand, you could always say this, that the Rambam is just doing this for the one person that's actually going to ever understand. He has language, and especially in the Akdama of Perish HaMishnah, which is much more closer, lifted straight from some philosophers that he read. And he says things like this. He says, you remember his famous, crazy image where, there's an entire society that builds an entire wall, a city, and nobody in the society was ever a philosopher. But one day, 100 years later, after the city was destroyed, there was a philosopher. I'm saying the word philosopher. The Rambam says a good knowledgeable, ish chacham v'toif, a good and knowledgeable person, human being. After this, the whole civilization died, and then there was once a good guy that was passing by there, and he was hot, and he was using the ruins of this civilization to shield himself from the sun and to be able to think about God, and that was the only purpose of that whole thing. That's the Rambam's. That's like a really radical image. He says it. Yeah, this is the Rambam's image. I think he copied it from someone, but he says it in the Agdama of Persha Mishnah. It talks about the point of the world, the end. And that is what logically follows when you think of if the point is to know God in the way that He wants, and if like the criteria is to know in that level, that's very logical.
Saying that everything else
is it's pointed. Pointed. Its point is that usually or at some point it helps somewhat for the Yechidam Uleh, for the one individual that actually gets somewhere. So it has a point, you see? Somewhat different than saying it's pointless. It's not pointless, it's pointless in itself.
They're not living out the point.
Right, but their point is someone else. Their goal, their end is someone else. And of course, and this is reasonable in some sense, like practice things like, I don't know why, but he has this thing like it's reasonable because the law of, not only that, the law of nature, they have things like this. The law of nature is such that to produce one complete human being, you need millions of useless human beings. Just like, the laws of nature actually do work this way. I know it's very not nice, not politically correct to apply it to humanity, but the laws of nature do work this way. You need like millions of sperm to create one human being. It sort of logically follows that you need millions of human beings to create one real human being. It's not crazy if you think about how nature actually works. It's not nice, not politically correct, but it's what some philosophers have seriously thought. It doesn't seem, again, as the Talmud of Moshe Rabbeinu, I don't think the Rambam really thinks this. And because I see him very much struggling, not only because he thinks that one good guy will once read it. It seems like it would not be the correct way to do it. Or at least you could always say that. It doesn't seem to be correct. Like you don't have to, for the main reason is because then you don't have to write in a simplified way, right? He says it there and all the places, of course he knows that you can't explain all the proofs to every person that's going to open Mishnah Torah, so he's going to do it in a very simplified way. He's going to make it basically into a Mishnah, something that every child could remember. What's the point of that? The smart people don't need that. It's the stupid people that need that. And the stupid people are the ones that are only going to be able to tell you the Mishnah, like the summary of the summary that they barely get. And he still thinks that that's worth doing. So he does seem to think, of course, he's not totally unrealistic. He doesn't think they will really know it, but he does think that they will somehow get closer to it, and it's worth the simplification and all the effort and the doing this sort of upside down thing, which is putting the most advanced thing in the beginning of the book and pretending that it's a simple thing for that. And this is again, I think that this is something very much that comes out of Moshe. This comes very much out of Torah. And that I'm seeing the Torah as being a way of getting God into the mind of every person and every person. Although it's very hard and not everyone he does a lot more than is reasonable to try to make that work. In some senses it succeeded because nobody thinks God has a body anymore. So unlike the of course
the deliberately incorrect perception of God.
But that's something real. Unlike the pessimistic prognosis of Ibn Rushd, who said don't ever teach the masses that God has no body because they'll become atheists. Okay, some people say we became atheists because of that, but unlike that, at least for a very long time, the Rambam taught all the Jews that God has no body, and they believed him, and they literally had some kind of, and then of course you could be like a philosopher and say, well, you don't really know what that means because you're still imagining, okay, it's some of the way there. That is my general thing about the aims, and it turns out with this, it's obviously, it's funny, we still have this, paradox, the most basic, everyone knows that there's a God, sometimes I've been reading people saying the Rambam has this thing, it says that Ramban, I don't understand what he wants. The Ramban doesn't say it as radically. Some other Achronim say it radically. The Rambam says that, God came to Moshe and told him, and this means he explained him the existence of God. And then people go what? Moshe didn't know the existence of God. Moshe need God, he need this whole Maimonides to tell us. And of course you do. This is the most advanced thing. Because these people are reading it their first way, or the way they teach it in school, and everyone knows there's a God. Yeah. So by doing this, you open yourself to this problem. Even the fact that we taught everyone that there's a God is some kind of revealing of a secret that shouldn't have been revealed. course, at least the kind of God that you mean. If you mean like some power or whatever, that's not the point. But it's like the existence of God is like the most basic thing. It's the first thing you know, but it's also the last thing you know, in the real sense, and that's a circle.
And the definition is fully exhausted after all the details are complete. Right, so I could tell you there's a God, and then once you start the questions, you only understand what that first sentence means after you finish.
Yeah, and the middle is the most problematic phase, because then you have the questions without the answers.
Right.
And that's why, basically, that's how we do all these complicated.
You can also end up with a result that the proposition doesn't identify with, right? So if you say that there's like a boundless or whatever, some kind of there's a totally necessary being. If you end up with that being a cantaloupe.
Yeah, but you don't end up with that. Well, for the most part, the Rambam literally, this is the explanation of the end of the fourth parak in Nachsi. The Rambam does something that he says, let me give you the rundown, the like basic summary of all of the secrets of the Torah. I said this is a class about the secrets of the Torah. So that's how it works. I'm gonna tell you all of it, okay? All of them are this. They're all in the first 4 chapters, literally the first thing you read. And then at the end of it says, don't read this. It's backwards. It doesn't say first, don't read it. So this is what I just told you. These are the things that you shouldn't speculate about. So this is him trying to have his cake and eat it too, you know? This is way of trying to yes, you're gonna know it in the most basic way, but then if someone says, okay, let me use it to think, then he says, don't think. Because in order to actually think about this, you're gonna need to go to university. And maybe in 35 years, you'll go back to thinking of what I told you in pre-1A. So in between, you're stuck with some kind of emunah pshuta, with some kind of.
Right?
Yeah, it works. It works. I mean, it works for some people.
I'm saying it also lets people, if you explain to someone the classical, like that's the famous example, classical music. Right?
Anything is like this, really.
When the classical music is beautiful, they're not going to understand that it's beautiful until they understand classical music.
Yeah,
right?
But it's worse than that, because he goes on and to talk about totally different things.
Classical music is beautiful, but I won't experience the beauty of classical music.
Yes, but it's even worse because he goes on to talk about totally different things. He goes on to say, okay, these are the most deepest things. I just told you all of them, but you don't understand what I just told you. Now let's just talk about Hilchos Kiddush Hashem. Okay, we'll get to that next week if I could talk about that connection. But now let's talk about Hilchos Mizuz, you know. And then in 35 years, you'll maybe get back to the beginning. And you're not going to get there by learning the whole Rambam, just to be clear. You've got to learn a lot of other things. So it's not even a close enough circle like the one you're talking about. Like you have to first believe that it's good and then you do it. No, it doesn't. That's what I'm telling you. It's not like your circle of classical music. It's more like this is the whole thing, in some sense. It's just a summary. In order to understand it, it's actually closer to what Mishnah Torah does for halacha. Because Mishnah Torah does this for halacha. It takes the summary, it takes the Gemara, which is, besides for being dialectic, the Rambam does think that it has the reasoning of the halach, of the laws, like the causes of the laws, the why the laws are the way they are. And the Rambam doesn't give you that in Mishnah Torah. He doesn't. Maybe this is connected. I think I gave you this class once that is the same concept, but he doesn't give you the reasoning for the laws. And there's many people that criticize me about this, but in any case, he doesn't give you the reasons why the laws are the way the halachos are the way they are. Just tells you the maskonos of the Gemara, do this, don't do that. And so he does try to do it in the most general way. So he doesn't only want to talk about the tables, wants to talk about what a table is and things like that. But it doesn't tell you why that is. So the real reason he never gives, which is in the Shakafatai of the Gemara, you do get it. So this is because of this. Maybe it's complicated, but that's in some levels what's going on. In other words, he agrees, and he calls the Shlish B'Talmud that the real reasons of the laws, maybe the psukim that cause it, or maybe the reasoning, the svaras that cause it, are not in his book. And in order to get it, you're going to have to go back to the Talmud. Or you're going to have to do what the Talmud does, maybe not literally go back to the book. You're going to have to do a whole different limit. And in that sense, it's very similar to what he does for Agudah, what he does for Yesod Torah, and what he does for the rest of the Torah is very similar, because he likes like this. There's this whole philosophy. I'm going to give you the rundown of it, the summary, what you should do with it. Like, think these things, basically. If you think these things...
Giving a halacha, because halacha, the point of the dialectics aims at the objective that you're doing. Not
entirely. No, not entirely. Not only. There's one side of that, but there's also the real reasons of the laws. Maybe they're not ultimately truth, so therefore it's a different problem, but at least there is a tree for each law.
That reason is internal to the objective.
Yeah,
right?
Okay, maybe. That's true. It's metaphysically different, but it's not different in the way of learning. Right? In other words, he does this, takes the whole philosophy. If you read the whole Rambam, you will know everything. In other words, if you know all the words that he says, like the summaries that he's doing, you'll know everything, but you'll also know nothing. because you'll know the reasons for nothing, including not the reasons for why God exists and not the reasons for why you have to have 2 challahs on Shabbos.
I feel like what you're saying is the same thing of having your cake and eat it too, like in terms of you have to have like the sense of purpose, but we're not giving you the purpose. Meaning this is the reason, but he's essentially the whole Sefer is not doing that.
Well, the reason is the first 4 chapters or the Yesod Torah.
Right, but you're not really getting the reason. You know, you were saying it's like a tree. You gotta have the ikar, but at the same time.
Yes, he's giving you the ikar
right.
in the wrong way.
Right.
In the stuffle way, in the yes, it's true, but there's no, there, I don't think there's a way.
Right.
There's a way.
That was his point.
Yeah.
Which is a little.
Yes, he is doing it in the wrong way. He's giving you it, well, in the wrong way, only in the way of the wrong way, right? It's the correct result,
right.
But it's the wrong way.
But it's really it's the opposite of what he's trying to do almost. Because it's the whole idea.
People, you could argue this. I mean, this is. I think this is the real problem, both with the Rambam's halacha and with the Rambam's. This is a real problem. What you're asking, I hope you're asking this, or at least is a real problem both with the Rambam's halacha and with the Rambam's Yesod Torah, because the reason we have Yesod Torah is for knowledge, and in order to do that, he gives you correct opinions. Remember the difference. Same way, like the reason. Well, the halacha is a little different because you could say that the whole point of halacha is just to find out what to do. But in the same way, like I'm going to clarify you the whole Torah, but I'm not going to actually give you what clarifies it. And the Rav Chazdek Kretzkas criticized them for both actually. It's slightly different, but he criticized the halacha very clearly this way. There's the criticism of halacha exists. What? Yeah. Kretzkas said that the Rambam tries to summarize halachas, but he does a very horrible job at it because he doesn't give you the reasons for any halachas. And it's like he's pretending like giving you these like klolim, there's like general rules, but you don't actually get the general rule. You just get like a particular instance of the general rule, which doesn't help you actually understand what the halacha should be in the next case. That's a criticism that Kretzkas has of the Rambam's halacha. Yeah, he says it's not teachable, right? Remember that teaching means, that's why I tell you the example of the tree, right? Teaching means that you can reproduce it from the seed of the tree, like the root of the tree. If I know what cause is, right? If I know the cause, that's why Aristotle said that teaching is always teaching of causes, right? Unlike just the art, we just pretending, right? We're just not pretending. We're just mimicking what you taught. You can actually know how to do it yourself. And if you learn the whole Rambam, you can't make even one halacha by yourself because that's only in the Talmud and it's explicitly not in the Rambam. In this way, there's a way. I wonder. Sometimes I think that's wrong. That the Rambam does think that the causes of the halachas are in the Rambam. Just thinks of them in a different way. But it's for sure true for the philosophy that he does. That the causes of the philosophy are not in his book. He's clear about.
I don't know a lot of Rambam, but in some instances, like in the beginning of Prakim, he does go through a little bit, like, unless I'm wrong, of like reasons and stuff.
Reasons of in Rambam in Mishnah Torah.
Yeah, the reasons for why they're connected to the Torah, the reasons for why that mitzvah is what it is.
Yeah, stuff like that.
It's not totally devoid of any explanatory things, but it's not part of the natural.
No, it's true. It's true. He does do explanations. Sometimes he does. Sometimes he even like his histories and different things.
Like what he talks about. I think Hanukkah maybe.
Yeah, Hanukkah famously. I know. I know. There's some different places that he does that. I know you could. This is complicated. I'm not sure if it's true. Like in some sense, I told you for halacha it's more complicated. Our halacha what he does, and the Rambam might think that what he gives is all the reasons that you need. It's not clear to me. I have different ways of thinking about this. For philosophy, for sure, he explicitly says this. And if you read even the quote that I brought you, he explicitly says, "I'm going to give you the conclusion of the philosophy without the philosophy," which is, in some sense, and you can argue this about the Rambam's philosophy, he did the worst thing. And sometimes some people are mad at him about this because the Rambam, in some sense, of course. You shouldn't do it, but you shouldn't say this, but you could argue that in some sense the Rambam ruined all Yidden from being philosophers. Because, well, the way of saying this would be something like dogmatizing truths is the worst thing to do to them. What the Rambam did,
because then they could satisfy that like urge without
not only because they could satisfy it, because now, for example, this is only halfway true, but for example, we say that the goal is to know God, right? Now, the goal is not to know that the Rambam says that you should believe in God. That is the opposite of the goal. The Rambam does seem to think that is somewhat helpful. That is the thing that you were missing when you say this criticism. But people, someone could say something like this. If there wouldn't be a Rambam, and I sometimes say things like this, not relevant to the Rambam, but relevant to other people that do something that they think they're doing the same thing as the Rambam is doing. Right, I say something like this. So sometimes I have a debate sometimes with someone. If people there's a thing. Some people have a thing that the yeshivas don't teach enough Jewish hashkafa. They teach a lot of halacha and gemara, but they don't give you like Yesod Hadas. So therefore, we should have more hashkafa classes in yeshiva, or Emunah classes. We should teach them Rambam and whatever and all kind of things. That's what some people say. And I usually say that this is wrong. Why? Because I value a thought, and the best way of killing thought is to teach it in yeshiva ketana. So since I think that the goal of the person is to think that you're going to give everyone a set of thoughts, and then the rest of life they're going to go around preaching Rav Dessler's Torahs, which might be right or wrong, but they never thought them. Now the Rambam does something analogous for all of Judaism. Like he thought that thought is important, and because he knew that you can't actually get people to think, you could only give them conclusions. So he gave everyone conclusions, and now everyone is like has nervin, like am I yoytze the Hilchas Emunah of the Rambam? Basically, not even people that don't actually have nervin, they really do. Like everyone is very fearful of thinking, and therefore they never actually have the thoughts that the Rambam really want them to have. So instead of helping his cause, he blocked his cause, because he dogmatized the thought. And dogma is like the opposite of thought. Yeah. That's a real problem that people could have, and of course the Rambam never meant you to do this.
Right. It could be the Rambam was dealing with returns.
Well, he was dealing with the hoi polloi, the masses, which are what they are, and he thought that he's helping them. I think he was helping them, but that's different than saying.
It depends on what you consider the alternative to be. If you consider the alternative to writing those down, that out of every 100 people because they want to start this. It's also
I also think that factually more philosophers come out of dogmatic schools than less dogmatic schools.
It's also like very few
I still don't know if I still don't support teaching in Yeshiva Ketana, but maybe I'm wrong according to these theories in the Siddur. Whatever, I didn't put it there.
The fear of teaching it also in Yeshiva Ketana is that people might learn Aristotle and try to get Aristotle instead of the right truth about God, right?
Yeah, but will they? Nobody reads anything.
But I also...
Point is, this is an argument that you could make, and similar to what people sometimes say, and you can say the same answer, that the Rambam is trying to make the Talmud closer to people, and ends up making it further by training people to just have the maskana and not the halach. And some people say, okay, the Rambam wanted that, and others say something different, that actually the Rambam caused more people to learn Gemara than before that. Because now you learn the Rambam and like curious, where does it come from? And like there's like history that claims this, that the Rambam actually made people go back to the Talmud instead of making the Talmud less. Because now like there's also I don't know why, but that's like the funny way of history. There's the arguments that say this. Why?
Brisk.
Yeah, no, but it's true because the Rambam. Okay, there's different reasons why this is true. There's different people that are making these arguments. Point is,
halfway. No, in some sense, that's what's going on, right?
Yeah, whatever. I'm not making comments over this now. Point is, no, in general. No, I already did a whole share about once on Sukkot. You were here, Sukkot?
Yeah.
Anyways, that's the Nikud. Anyways, that's a yeah. So, anyways, I'm gonna stop here. That's a criticism that can be. So, in other words, the Rambam. Let's go back to where I said we said that it's important to have the truths, and that they're also the roots of everything else, and therefore it's like illogical and absurd to have branches without roots, and therefore we also have to teach the roots themselves, which leads us to this problem of having the maximum being the minimum, and having like most advanced thinking the first thing to be taught, and that leads us in some kind of circle and to this whole dialectic of esotericism and like saying things and saying the true things without actually saying them, and we ended with this real problem that this causes, which is that the truths are supposed to be discursive, they're supposed to be achieved by knowledge and not by believing what the Rambam says. And there is an argument to be made that the Rambam ruined this by having everyone know that God is not about it because the Rambam said. And of course, it's not really true, but it's something to be worried about, something to think about. Okay.
The real way to write it.
I think that's enough for this.
Maybe the correct order then is to